Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Like me, you probably also find it very annoying that no matter how bad Canada's economy gets, there is always some liberal government official or minister willing to come out to say, it's never been better. They will find some obscure statistic, and if you really squint at it, you could kind of see that we're doing okay on that metric, but they'll present it like we're setting records. We have the best growth in the G7. We are the happiest economy in the G20 or something like that. Every week I hear some really stupid stat about how, well, Canada has the most livable cities based on this random survey. So who cares that our per capita income's going down consistently quarter after quarter? And this is why I find this clip from a financial committee meeting so great. The interim parliamentary budget officer showed up and called Mark Carney's spending stupefying and shocking. The PBO is effectively a watchdog position that tries to keep the government within some fiscal guardrails. And because they're not tied to any party and they're supposed to be very nonpartisan, tends to be someone who's very technical when it comes to finances, they will just tell you straight out how bad things are. The previous guy was quite good, and this guy seems even better. So I want to play this clip for you guys in just a second. This is an answer to a question that conservative MP, I believe Jeremy Patzer, is asking, and then we will get to a clip afterwards where a liberal MP tried to do the annoying thing I was talking about at the start. Well, aren't we doing really well in growth in the G7? And it gets shut down because no, you cannot cite something like raw GDP growth as some symbol of how healthy our economy is when every other stat that actually gets down to how individuals are doing sucks. But, anyways, before we get into it, guys, I just want to remind you that if you like this show, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you are not yet a subscriber, I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers by mid-December of this year. We are almost at 80,000, so I encourage you guys, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to the channel, and then also comment on what you think about all of this. It helps us on the algorithm, and I do like to scroll through and see what people are saying. But without further ado, here is a fantastic clip.
The public debt charges is $53.6 billion, and that projection is going to increase in 2030 to $82.4 billion. Is that sustainable?
And so this is not the PBO interim that they cut to first, but what Patzer there is referencing, or Pazzer, I can never say people's last names right. Patzer, there we go. What he's citing is even just the own government's projections on how big deficits are going to be over the next 5 years. And even then, he's being generous because at the moment, we're already like 50, 60 billion in a deficit in this year. But by the end of the year, it could be that $93 billion number. And so, even based on the government's own stats, it's not a very good look that we're still going to be running deficits into the high tens of billions a year. I'll let this clip play on.
Every dollar spent on debt is a dollar that is not spent elsewhere.
Again, how alarming is that for the average Canadian, for the taxpayer? Because there is only one taxpayer, right?
It should be very alarming, right? These are, I don't know, I think I use the words in French, and which the translators probably got really well, like stupefying, shocking. Right? This is not like it's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook. And we don't lightly use the word unsustainable, right? Unsustainable means you don't have the option of saying maybe I'll wait a couple of years, I'll see how things go. It means if you don't change, this is done, right? So it's very serious.
I think we can all like that guy. I like just how frank he is, and I wish there were way more people working in government who could just tell you what they actually think in language that's appropriate. And when I say language that's appropriate, I mean, with a certain amount of intensity, not kind of, fiddling around the edges and being like, well, it's not ideal. maybe in the future, if we had some restraint, things would be better. Like, just tell me how bad things are now, and if we don't change, how bad will things get? And so Jason Jacques, fantastic PBO interim a budget officer. I'd love for him to stick around because that guy's pretty great. And to highlight how great he is, here is a Liberal MP trying to do a follow-up with Jason Jacques and just getting shut down.
And obviously, you project, so we're on a good fiscal path, or a
Yes, Vince, please rephrase that before you get smacked.
we're on a better fiscal path than some of our G7 colleagues, and you project our deficit staying under 2% of GDP and debt holding near the low 40% range. Would you agree that these kinds of thresholds are really, in practice, fiscal anchors that signal some discipline?
I would go back to one of the comments I made at the outset that like the most important word in the release this morning was unsustainable. We like it. I don't know. We didn't.
I love this. Like, he's kind of realizing there's kind of like a decorum here, and he can't just haul off and call him an idiot. But it's like, we're keeping the deficits under 2% or whatever. It's like, okay, it's still $80 billion. The thing is, it's still debt that you then have to service. So then, yeah, your deficit's only 2%, but what's your debt servicing cost becoming when there's always 2% of spending is deficit spending?
We didn't choose it carelessly. I've been in the office for 17 years. I was working in the federal government, putting together budgets for 10 years prior to that. You got to be like, you choose these words with prudence and care. And certainly we don't want to be alarmist. And at the same time, like the current path we're on in terms of federal debt as a share of the economy is unsustainable.
Yeah. And the thing is that they can say all day long, well, there's more debt per capita. There's more federal debt in the United States. There's more federal debt in Japan. But the thing is that those are more highly functioning economies than Canada is. Yeah, you can have your stats can technically be better if we really squint and we say, well, we have less federal debt than America does. Okay, but America has economic power. Canada is kind of plodding along and hoping that we don't collapse. The thing is that it's not just saying that we are carrying less percentage of weight of our economy in debt doesn't mean that we can carry it the same way that America can carry even more debt than we can. It's oh my goodness. And the thing is, again, we have Mark Carney as our prime minister. The guy who was supposed to be like the fiscal hawk. He's the liberal that you can put some trust into because, he understands economics. He understands how things work. He's the man to lead us through crisis. He was he was the governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, worked at Goldman Sachs, worked at, Brookfield Asset Management. And every time I think of Brookfield Asset Management, I'm like, well, you mean the company that basically mostly only invests in subsidy industries, doesn't actually know how to, invest in good industries that are just profitable because they're just, genuinely are providing products on the market that people want. No, Brookfield Asset Management makes all of its money in like green tech and, battery plants and wind farms and stuff like that. Yes, they do invest in other things, but like so much of their portfolio is stuff that only is profitable while the government is throwing grants and tax subsidies and whatnot to it that you don't need to give to the oil and gas industry at all. And you always get the liberals out there be like, no, actually the oil and gas industry gets the most subsidies every year. No, they're not subsidies. They sometimes on large projects will get loans at lower interest rates by the government because it's a massive project. They still have to pay it back. Or they get a tax deferment for a couple years later. But the thing is, they're still paying the exact same amount of taxes in the long run. Calling it a subsidy is the dumbest thing ever, considering these same people who then look at a chart and like, oh, wow, the green tech sector, the green energy sector is doing so well. Look at this bar chart. And then you pull out like the subsidy bar chart. So like the growth in the industry and then the growth in subsidies are like basically the same chart. The green energy industry is only growing off of the back of, Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau and moronic premiers like Doug Ford just dumping money into EV plants and battery plants and wind and solar farms. It's so foolish. But now I want to jump over to Gary Amasangri, guys. We got to check in on old Gare here because he's having a bad week. After being secretly taped, admitting that the gun buyback scheme is a scam and that it's not going to work, and that we should just be arresting criminals, and that he was talking to his tenant on the tape, and he even offered that, hey, if you don't want to hand in your guns and you get prosecuted, I'll help you pay your legal bills. But here's him on Power and Politics trying to justify himself in the aftermath of a truly terrible week by the standards of any minister.
I want to ask you about firearms and firearm crime, because really when you look at some of the statistics from police, it suggests that most of the guns used in the commission of a crime in this country don't come from legal firearms owners in this country. They come from the United States. I was looking at some of the data. The Toronto Police Service very helpfully supplied some. 90% of the guns that they take off the streets as part of a sweep when it comes to a crime come from the United States. Illegal firearms from the Americans. Why crack down on legal firearms owners who arguably go through very stringent requirements to get a license and then have to follow a bunch of paperwork and regulations and what have you? Why go after them and not pour the $742 million you've allocated for this gun buyback program into beefing up the things that are happening at the border to stop what is really the main source of crime guns in this country?
And that's a great question. For some reason, always like the fill-in hosts on the CBC are better than the main hosts. But like, we haven't even hired a single new cop. They want to put 1,000 new border agents or police officers along the border, and they have not hired one. They then say, well, it's not just the cops. We're also going to get drones. It's like, well, have you got any drones? Well, no, we're going to get them. It's like, guys, it's been months. Again, big national projects by other countries are finished in half the time it takes the Liberal government to put out a press release. But sorry, I'm cutting off Mr. Amasangri here. Here's his answer to that very well put question.
JP, have outlined the other efforts we're making on firearms, including additional resources at the border, additional RCMP, CBSA officers, the changes we're making to
is it public money well spent?
record.
We obviously are in a finite budget situation. You're about to cut across the board some 15% if the prime minister gets his way. $742 million that is going to be spent on this buyback program. Couldn't you deploy that to other areas, including cracking down on where the guns are actually coming from, where these crime guns are sourced, the United States? Like, I think in this era where money is tight, does it make sense to expend this sort of money and police people who are not largely responsible for the gun crimes that we're seeing?
Yeah, so that didn't go so well for Gary Amasangri. I can assure you, if it cut back to him giving another answer, it was basically reiterating, "Oh no, we're still doing all the right things. You just gotta be patient. We just need to also care about getting guns off our," and just repeating garbage where not only is he admitted it's all wrong, but just everyone's basic common sense tells them, if you want less crime, arrest criminals. I know it's simplistic. Oh, we got to get to the root causes of crime. The root causes of crime are criminals. If you just lock up the criminals, they will not commit crime. I know there's always more criminals out there. There's always people starting their life of crime. But the whole point is it's politically incorrect to say mass incarceration works. Whenever people criticize incarcerating criminals and giving them harsh sentences, they'll be like, well, recidivism can still remain quite high. It's sometimes people don't get rehabilitated. Okay, if you leave prison, you commit another crime, I'll lock you up for twice as long. How about that? What do we owe these people? That they get to like eventually open the cupcake shop that they've always wanted to as a kid, rather than mugging old women on the street? I'm pretty sure we should just, lock them up harder. I don't care that they have dreams and aspirations. Just lock them up if they're committing crimes. What is this? Like, it's just, you don't do the crime if you can't do the time. I like that philosophy on criminal justice. Why was I not being able to get that word out there? But here's a great clip from Kyle Seaback, also going after the gun buyback scheme. I think this is a great distillation of just just all of the elements of how has become embarrassing for Gary Amasangari and the Liberal government.
Public, he supports it, but in private, he calls it a politically motivated scam that won't work. Talking out of both sides of your mouth should be a fireable offense, but it's worse. His job is to keep Canadians safe. Gun crime's up 130%, so he's failed, and he's pushing forward with a program he says won't actually work. What will it take for the Prime Minister to fire this minister?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, in order to have a serious conversation about crime, we need to have a serious conversation about guns, Madam Speaker. We brought forward, as of this week, launched a program in Cape Breton where we are compensating lawful gun owners who are willing to forgo their AR-15 and other harmful weapons, Madam Speaker. In addition to that, we're securing the border with $1.3 billion in investments.
They've spent money, but they've not actually hired any cops yet. That's kind of the problem. I hate this rhetoric. We want to have a conversation. We want to have a dialogue. Can we have a dialogue, guys? Can we sit down and talk? We just want to talk. I don't know. I just go into lazy, mumble mouth voice whenever I want to portray how much this annoys me. Guys, can we just sit down and discuss things? We want to have a serious conversation about guns. You're in government. You're just supposed to have good policy. What is this? Oh, we did something stupid, but it was to strike up a conversation.
We have Bill C2 right in front of the House, Madam Speaker, that the party opposite, if it's serious about gun crime, can support and pass through the House, Madam Speaker. We are looking...
Member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Let's have a serious conversation about gun crime. The Toronto Police Association says 90% of guns used in gun crimes are illegal crimes. Are illegal guns? Are they going after that? No. They've come up with this $750 million politically motivated scam. Not my words, the Public Safety Minister's words. And you know what else he said? Don't ask me to explain the logic of it. So if we're going to have a real conversation, why aren't they going after the criminals, the 90% of illegal guns that are making our communities unsafe? His job is to make our communities safe. He's failing, and he's admitted it's a scam. Why won't...
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Here is what's clear, Madam Speaker.
Bailing out Gary.
What is clear is that on this side of the House, we will put in place meaningful measures to make sure that assault rifles are not available to the people who have perpetrated mass killings and tragedies in this country. That is what Canadians want. That is what Canadians ask for. That is what the Liberal Party has always stood for.
The mass killings have been done with illegal guns. What is he talking about? As if they're being provided to mass killers. The mass killers don't go for legally owned, legal weapons, because oftentimes they couldn't pass a background check, and they're the type of people who don't really follow the law, as you may have gotten the impression from them committing massive acts of violence.
What the Conservative Party has always stood for is making these arms available across the country and doing nothing to ban them. Hunters tell us they don't need them to take down a deer.
Hunters have told us they don't need those weapons to take down a deer. Well, okay, I'm not sure if all guns should only be available based on what can take down a deer. And based on that logic, they'd have to get rid of a lot of firearms off of their ban list. But again, their arguments are purely arbitrary because their law is arbitrary, and they're probably going to have to kill this law eventually in a similarly arbitrary fashion because they don't like the political blowback. This has been a mess of their own making. It was a stupid policy that they've marketed in a stupid way, and then Gary Amasangari did the one honest thing by telling his tenant what he really thinks about the law, and now he's regretting it because people know what he actually thinks now. But that's just how politics works sometimes. Anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. I do just want to quickly make a plug for, if you live on Vancouver Island, we have a 1BC event taking place tomorrow in Mill Bay. Hopefully you can show up to that. I won't be able to be there. I just cannot possibly be all over the place all at once. And then we actually had yesterday, I made a video. I felt embarrassed because, you put out a video, you say something that turns out not to be true 4 hours later. This isn't like a correction, I spread misinformation. But in Penticton, we had our 1BC event at the the Penticton Trade Conference Center or whatever. It got shut down by all these left-wing activists saying that we're racist, we're phobic, we're we're whatever. Obvious nonsense, but all these people who, work at a publicly funded conference center are looking for an excuse to not allow a party like 1BC to show up because they don't work on a profit motive. And so they told us that we were no longer allowed to be there because we don't have the right values. And then the Art Up studio in town was going to let us have our event there. And they even leaked all the messages from these left-wing activists, this person named Loki Boki, trying to shut down our event. And it demonstrated that the person's just going around smearing us to people and trying to threaten protests and whatnot and attacking the businesses. Art Up was going to do the event, but from threats and pressure, now they don't want to do anymore. And they definitely wanted to. It wasn't like, they suddenly now believe we're bad people. It's like, well, if you have people wanting to protest your store and potentially try and tell your customer base no longer to show up for having the audacity to have a conservative party do an event there, I can see why they maybe had to kind of pull out. So we are trying to find a different location for Penticton. And I think if you still sign up at the link on our website for Penticton, we will let you know where that event is going to be at. And then also, if you live in Calgary, guys, if you live in Calgary, please get yourself a Sonia Sharp for mayor sign. She is the only conservative candidate in the race who can actually win. And I think from the videos I've been doing, the channel has placed about around 500 signs around the city. So we've been doing our part here. So make sure to do yours if you live in Calgary and put a lawn sign on your property, or even go pick up a lawn sign at their HQ and put it in your window if you live in an apartment. But anyways, with that all being said, I will see you guys all later.